Hello, hello. It's Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. If you're joining me for the live stream premiere, let me know if you can see me and hear me in the chat box. Good to have you with me. Today, we're going to be talking all about reference mixes. We actually did an episode about reference mixes a few weeks ago where I gave you my ideas about how to use reference mixes, whether you're mastering, mixing, producing, recording, what role they play in each stage in the production process. And I gave you guys the idea that I have a few of my own favorite reference mixes that I use constantly, and you should have some too. And a lot of people ask me, well, what are your top favorite reference mixes, Justin? And I promised that I would make another podcast episode about that. And this is that episode. This is going to be all about my top reference mixes, my favorite reference mixes. But honestly, to a degree, my favorite reference mixes are a little irrelevant. We'll hear them. But what is really relevant is you using the principles I've taken to create my own reference mixes to create your own favorite reference mixes. They're going to serve the same purposes for you. We're going to be able to hear some tracks together today. I've got both Pro Tools open here, and I've got Spotify open. Let's see, here's my Pro Tools screen, and we'll also end up sharing my Spotify screen as well. There we go. So I have a whole bunch of those for you here. We'll listen to those. I don't want to spoil it too much. But before I get into hearing some of these tracks with you, I just want to give you a quick sense for what I'm looking for in reference mixes. So what am I looking for? There are three categories of reference mixes in my book. One of these category of reference mixes are tuning references. And those are the three that I pulled up in Pro Tools right now that we're going to listen to in just a second. Tuning references are for tuning a room, tuning a listening environment, or just as importantly, tuning yourself to a new listening environment. These three mixes that I pulled up first are the three mixes that I listen to on literally every single new speaker system I go into. And I don't even have to listen to the whole song. If I listen to 30 seconds of any of these songs, I can really understand a new monitoring environment inside and out. This is helpful if you are in a live sound environment where you're going to a new venue and you want to hear how that venue sounds. It's extremely important if you're traveling from one studio to another and you want to hear how that studio sounds. You just installed new speakers in your room. You put up some new acoustic treatment in your room. You want to see what impact those things have had. You started to use something like SonarWorks or something like Trinov, these room correction systems. How are you going to know what changes have happened in your room? Yes, you can look at a graph, but how does that translate to you physically and you really understanding the space? I can literally get any new pair of headphones, listen to a snippet of these three reference mixes, and have a superb understanding of what they're doing in the low frequencies and the low mids and the mid-range and the high frequencies, because every single pair of headphones I've auditioned, I listen to these same three tracks on. And more. If I'm really serious about auditioning headphones, I'm going to listen to even more tracks than just these three primary references. But that's our first category of reference that I want you to have, is your tuning references for tuning yourself to new environments or tuning your listening environment. The other big category of reference mixes for me would be genre references. Those, when I'm mastering, I love to have supplied by the client. But when the client isn't supplying me with references, just records they love the sound of that are relevant to their genre, then I'll supply my own and I'll give you a sense for what I look for in some of my genre references. So that's type of reference number 2. And then type of reference number 3. These are going to be learning references. There are some records I've learned a tremendous amount from. Records that taught me how to hear compression, how to hear limiting, how to hear certain types of delay and reverb. And that's another category. We'll listen to a whole bunch of tracks today. And I also want to get your nominations for your favorite reference tracks. If you have any references in these three categories: 1, your tuning references, something you can put up on any system so you understand that system, so you can tune yourself to the system. 2, your genre references and specific genres, things that really kind of strike the right balance, that get an ideal in that genre. And 3, learning references, records that have just taught you a tremendous amount about one specific thing or more. All right, without any further ado, let's get into listening to this stuff. I'll play some tracks for you, and then we'll shout out a little further on in the episode this week's sponsors. The sponsors, just so you know, are always you. Make sure you like and subscribe. We haven't even gotten to analyzing these yet, but hopefully just that framework was enough to earn your like and your subscribe if you're on the YouTubes. If you are on one of the audio-only versions, consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. Also, big shout out and thanks to some of our other sponsors this week. We'll talk about it more later. Focusrite, they're sponsoring this week. They just came out with a new generation of the Scarlett interface, probably the most popular interface ever. Big shout out and thanks to Sound Toys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. And also big shout out and thanks to Atom Audio. Those guys just come out with their A4 and A7 monitors for limited time in a beautiful Arctic white color. So check those things out. Also, check out our Grateful Ink courses. If you want to learn to mix better than ever before, check out Mixing Breakthroughs or EQ Breakthroughs, Compression Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified. All of these come with a 30-day money-back guarantee. They will change the way you work forever for the better guaranteed or your money back. All right, now let's hear my references, and I'm going to give you a sense for why I like them, what they do for me. We'll get into Spotify in a second. We'll start here in Pro Tools. All right, I'm going to grab my headphones, and there's a few different subcategories in this category of tuning references. The most important things for me, if I need to learn a new pair of headphones or new room really fast, is I listen to these three because they each do something unique. One of these references tells me a lot about the sub-frequencies, and that's the reference I'm going to play second. The reference I'm going to play second is actually the reference I literally play first every time I audition a new system. I've heard this track so many times since it came out because I've been using it as a reference since it came out. And just immediately in the first snippet, you'll hear what it tells me about subfrequencies. And we can look at some of this stuff together too on the frequency analyzer. So we'll get into that. Another track here that I've, again, been listening to for a couple of decades and is still relevant to me today. It tells me a lot more about the mid and upper bass. And these are the most confusing parts on any new system. The low end is the hardest thing to get right, particularly in a room, but also on headphones. And these two tracks tell me everything I need to know about those. But I'm going to start off by playing the reference that I usually listen to third on any of these new systems, because this is probably the most accessible and most familiar song out of the three that we're going to check out. And I just think it's really pretty. And this is this category of reference. This is the kind of track that you think is just really pretty sounding, really impressive sounding. It's just absolutely gorgeously produced. And you could listen to again and again, like for the rest of your life, and find new little things in it. This track was given to me as a reference by someone else who used it as a reference, my good friend Mark Allen Goodman, who had a gorgeous studio called Strange Weather Recording in Brooklyn, where I did a whole bunch of sessions back in the day. He played this song for me in his studio, which I'd heard before, but I finally heard it in his studio on his system. I was like, oh, I get it. And this will tell me so much about a system, particularly a good system. So before we listen to this one, I hope that you have some good headphones on, you have good speakers going, and all these references, I think you should crank loud. So let me know if the volume of these references are coming back at a good level for you, or if I should turn them up. More recently, I've have a kind of hotter mic profile here on the podcast. So if these audio clips are too quiet, just let me know. I can turn it more. But this very first one is a song called Paper Tiger by the artist Beck. I believe this one's mastered by Bob Ludwig. Was it produced by Nigel Godrich? I'll have to look it up. It's on the Sea Change album. Gorgeous sounding record. And this one, I mean, it just has great extension into the low end. It has a beautiful, smooth top end that's not overly dark. Amazing stereo width. And there's a lot of elements in here where you can really hear the transients. I mean, you can see on this waveform just how not super limited it is. It's still a good, loud sounding mix. When we get into the loudest sections, you can see that there's some limiting happening here, but there's also these really open moments in it. So I can get a real good sense for the transient response of the system. I can get a sense for how it sounds when things are pushed really hard, because that happens in the choruses. I can get a sense for low end extension, most importantly on this one for me, stereo imaging, and it's just pretty and gorgeous, and there's so many little flourishes. We'll listen to the first maybe 90 seconds of it, and listen along with me on this track, and let me know what stands out to you. On this one, I'm not looking for any one specific thing. It's just an impression of how the system sounds. Here we go.
Just like a paper tiger, torn apart by idle hands. helter-skelter morning. Fix yourself while you still can. No more ashes to ashes. No more cinders from the sky. And all the laws of creation tell a dead man how to die. Oh, deserts down below us and storms up above, like a stray dog gone defective, like a paper tiger in the sun looking through.
So I could listen to this whole song again now, regardless of how many times I've heard it. And that's one of the good things you want to look for in a reference. It should be material that you emotionally connect with enough that you don't mind really kind of zoning out and listening to it again and again. Just listening to these first 90 seconds, this tells me everything I need to know almost about a monitoring system. There's a couple of other little things I'm looking for in these other references we'll get to in just a second. But it's cool because if you listen to the whole thing, there's more and more ear candy as we go along. And you can really tell a lot about what's going on in the low in this track. The bass on this is just gorgeous. And there's all these hard panned elements that give you a great sense for how wide the stereo spread is on a system. But there's still high frequency detail in there. Can't say enough good things about this. And you can really hear just from the first couple notes in here, I can literally learn a lot about the low end just from this very intro.
Just like a paper tiger.
Just that bass fill.
Just like a paper.
Just those toms into the early kick hits. You can bring this up in a frequency analyzer, just see how much sub information is here. But still, a mix that translates well to smaller systems. This is, though, one of those mixes that sounds absolutely gorgeous on a big system, but it does maybe miss some of its majesty when we start rolling off some of the lows. It's not produced like some of the tracks that we've looked at in our mix breakdown series, or what makes this mix great series, where some of those pop mixes, man, they work just as well when you take off all the low end and take off all the top end. You listen to Britney Spears' Toxic or something like that, and it's just going to sound great on every single system, regardless of what's happening. Here, another good thing it does do for me is that if I get rid of some of the lows and highs, we do lose a considerable amount of what makes this super pretty. Let's hear that real quick, just this opening phrase.
Just like a paper.
I mean, that's a big difference if you're on a system with subs compared to.
Just like a paper.
So I'm really looking for that extension into the low octave, and that's something I can really identify with this track. The next one I want to get into is a track called Elephant Woman, and this is by an artist called Blonde Redhead. I remember being really impressed by the way this record sounded. And you can tell just by looking at it, this record is very different in production aesthetic in that the whole thing is a sausage, right? Except for this one little bit out here. I do have a comment here in the chat asking me to turn up the music, so I'll turn up the audio for the next couple of examples here. Hopefully you're able to crank Paper Tiger for yourself, because, man, if you put that thing up loud, it is gorgeous. Elephant Woman is mastered so that it's much more dynamically consistent throughout. And when this record came out, this was not as common of a thing to see. Records, especially indie rock records, that are mastered this hot. I'm going to look it up right now. It's called Misery is a Butterfly, is the name of the album. I want to double check the release date, but I'm going to guess this one was maybe 2005 or something. Released March 15th, 2004 on 4AD Records. And things then weren't like they are today, where you were starting to hear records just constantly pegged at like -6 or something like that. I'm not exactly sure if this record is right or is -6, but it might be somewhere around there. I bet it's at least -8 LUFS. Surprisingly loud record for its time, but really gorgeous sounding. And it was one of those first records that really made me understand that in like rock music and pop music and indie type music, you could master it a little bit and mix it a little bit like an electronic record, where what's happening is you don't get dynamics of the performance. The dynamics come from different instruments entering and leaving the arrangement. So this one, really interesting sound here. This comes from a band. I think Blonde Redhead were first signed by the band SonicScoop. SonicScoop. Sonic Youth. Their drummer, Steve Shelley, I think signed them to a record label in New York back in the day. And they probably had a couple of songs, I think, that have been hits on, like through lesser known movies. I think their Melody of Damaged Lemon, something like that. They have some songs that are somewhat known. This isn't one of them. But this is, I believe, the lead track off of Misery is a Butterfly. And the first time I heard it, I was like, whoa, this is a different type of production. But I also, one thing I found out about is the first time I actually took it into a good studio and listened to it is like, oh, there are things happening on this record that I cannot hear in other environments. It starts off with a kick drum pattern that gives us a lot of information down around 40 hertz. So this is a reference that I use to double check how the low end is on a system, how deep the low end extends. Can I hear the lowest things that happen on this track? If I can, then I know something about that system. And if I can't, I know something about that system. Also, what's happening here is the vocal is a kind of really pinched, compressed, mid-rangey sounding vocal. So that gives me a sense for what frequencies are accentuated or de-accentuated in the mid-range on a monitor. This is a mix where if you put on a pair of NS10s, like the vocals sound even louder and even more forward than on some bigger, fuller range systems. It tells me a lot about what's going on in the subs of a system and the mid-range of a system. Let's listen to it. I think you'll immediately hear what I'm talking about. If you have a good system, what's happening just in the first few seconds in here as far as sub energy goes. And then as the vocal comes in, I think you hear exactly what I'm talking about as far as mid-range. I also have a frequency analyzer up on screen so you can see what I'm talking about as well as hearing it. Here we go. Oops, I think that I've cut off the very beginning part I was talking about. Hold on one second. We'll come back to this track in just a second because I think maybe it's over here. Let's double check. Give me 1 second to suss this out. It should be here. Oh, this is weird. I grabbed a different version of this that doesn't have the low-end intro that I'm talking about on it that I wanted you guys to hear. So give me a second and I'll grab that when we go into Spotify. And we'll come back to that idea. So the last one I want to play for you right now is one that tells me something about the upper bass, and we'll come back to Elephant Woman. This one is Femme D Argent. It's by a band called Air, a French band. Let's double check when this record came out. It's called Moon Safari. And Moon Safari came out, I want to say this one's early 2000s, 1998. And this one just tells me so much about what's happening in more like the 70, 80 hertz region, the kind of upper bass region on a record. Let's hear it. Excuse me 1 second. I'm just turning up my level as we go with this because we had some requests. Man, I could just keep listening to that one, but I want to stop it here. We're about 90 seconds into this track, and this is like a 7-minute track, but I could just continue listening to this thing. I've heard this track so many times on so many systems, but I can just get like hypnotically lost in it, thinking about frequencies and different things that are happening. I mean, we have these keyboard elements, we have these guitar elements, we have these delay sounds, all of which are just interesting, compelling, and continuously morphing around this awesome bass line. I mean, this is one of clearly the greatest bass lines ever written in the history of bass lines. Now, one of the things you actually notice about what helps make the bass line so prominent in this track is the kick drum is practically non-existent. So sometimes when you hear a track and you're like, why can't I get my bass to sound like the bass on that track? Well, there's really nothing else competing with the bass on this one. But you can really see the bass line jumping around in this entire, it runs just the gamut of potential low frequencies of a bass instrument. From 60 hertz up to about 200 hertz, we have fundamental notes. So we can get a really good sense for the subs on the system way down into the 60, maybe just slightly below 60 range into the upper 50s. But it also gives us plenty of beautifully balanced information in this 80 hertz range, this 100 hertz range, even up into this 200 hertz range. So it just gives me a great picture for how the low end sounds overall, whether there's any spots where one of these bass notes jump out in particular. If there's any weak spots where I can't hear them as well, or they're missing notes in this bass line. I can tell so much about a system and a room environment just by listening to how this bass line works in that space. So that's another great one for me. I'm going to switch now over to the Spotify screen. Let me get into Spotify sharing mode here. And unfortunately, I didn't have the version of Misery's a Butterfly that I wanted. I think what I did accidentally is I pulled up the track Misery is a Butterfly by Blonde Redhead instead of the song Elephant Woman off of Misery is a Butterfly. That was my mistake there. So the actual name of the track I'm looking for is this one. Let's go ahead and add this to our playlist here. Add to playlist, top references. And let's go ahead and pull this one up. Yes, I have 25 references on here. We're clearly not going to get through all of them, but I'm going to give you an idea of what some of these are. So here's the track Elephant Woman. I think that I also have the ability to show you guys maybe my entire screen, and we can also look at a frequency analyzer in my audio hijack software here. So you guys can still see some of the stuff, even though we're no longer in Pro Tools. Give me 1 second to grab that. We'll go into Ecamm. We'll go into full screen share. Okay, cool. And now we'll go back over to Spotify. You should also see my audio hijack screen now. And now I'm going to bring up a frequency analyzer. Here's SPL Hawkeye that we should be able to put across. I hope this is going to work. Let's see. Going to do it. No, it won't let me do a frequency analyzer while I already have a different audio hijack thing running. But we can at least listen to this track, and you'll just have to trust me that the low end extension here goes way down to 40 hertz on these opening notes. So since I can't do that, give me 1 sec, and I'll go back here, back into Spotify share mode, and we'll just go ahead and play the track. Here we go from the top. Oh, and before I do, people requested higher volume. So let me grab that for you. Dead air in a live stream. So, do you guys know any good jokes? Here's my favorite one. You've probably heard me tell this joke before if I've ever done dead air before. This is my favorite joke. It's, how many hipsters does it take to screw in a light bulb? Really? You've never heard that one? Okay, here we go. Elephant Woman by Blonde Redhead. That's Paper Tiger. Here it is.
Angel, I can see myself in your eyes.
I had to stop it here. I can't just play the entire song. It's about to transition, though, into such a cool section. There's so much tension that's building here and almost a little bit of boredom, and it's going to pay off in like 8 seconds. But then I'll know I'll have played like 2 minutes of the song, and I don't want to get totally hammered by the YouTube gods. But it is a beautifully produced track. I hope you can hear what I'm saying about the mid-range in this vocal being this kind of really pinched mid-range forward sound. And if we listen to this opening again, just listening to these first handful of bars tells me all I need to know about a system, about how deep it can go, and can it really reproduce relevant information around 40 and 50 hertz cleanly. Let me know if you can hear the subs on this kick drum that's about to come in. We'll hear a little bit of a string interlude. We'll hear some, maybe there's a little bit of guitar actually in there. And then we'll hear the subs on this thing. Let me know if you can hear them all the way down to 40 or 50. Here we go. Just that pattern. Bum, 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 bum. Just that pattern, I can really tell so much about how deep a system goes. So between those 3 tracks, there's so much I can know about any system that I'm on. So I have one system to tell me about the mid and upper bass. That's Femme D Argent by Air. I have one track that tells me about really the deep subs and the mid-range, and that's Elephant Woman by Blonde Redhead off of Misery is a Butterfly, which I've heard a cajillion times. And also Paper Tiger by Beck just gives me the sense of, yes, low end extension again, but it also gives me a sense of stereo width and just overall height, depth, and width of the system, because Paper Tiger does something that Elephant Woman by Blonde Redhead doesn't, and La Femme d'Argent doesn't, which is that it's just maximally tall, deep, and wide. It goes so deep, but has really a kind of glossy, smooth top end that's still there and really clear and detailed. Whereas by comparison, both Misery is a Butterfly and La Femme d'Argent are a little bit more dense. They're a little bit more mid-rangey, even though they extend pretty deep. So those are some of the tracks that I'm always listening to, really on any system. And if I have more time, some of my other like test a system out tracks, I do like to listen to something from Random Access Memories by Daft Punk, because this record is mastered so quiet by modern standards with so much in the way of transients that I can really tell a lot about the transient response of a system. And this is something that separates inexpensive systems from really nice systems. This is the kind of track where I can hear the difference between planar magnetic headphones and dynamic headphones relatively easy, or hear the difference between non-ported speakers and ported speakers, or just hear the difference that an extra driver for the mid-range is giving me on speakers by speeding up transient response with stiffer or better materials. So I've got to say that probably the best song on Random Access Memories has got to be Instant Crush by Daft Punk. And maybe I'll listen to a couple seconds of that just because it's a great track, but it doesn't have the extreme transients that either Lose Yourself to Dance or Get Lucky by Pharrell have. For me, Get Lucky is kind of like the cheesiest song on the record. I don't love it. Of all the big songs on the record, is the cheesiest one. It's not my favorite as a song, but it's good to listen to, I think, as a production for some of these details. So let's hear that.
Legend of the Phoenix all ends with beginnings. What keeps the planet spinning? The force from the beginning. Love. We come too far to give up who we are.
Man, by modern standards, that's just like an undercompressed record. And there's so much transient going on, especially in the low end compared to so many records. There's just this additional, what I would call punch, when you get this prominent yet controlled transient attached to something that's really full sounding. Lose Yourself to Dance is the same kind of thing going on. Now, this record is almost mastered like too subby. You almost lose something on this record if you're not listening to it on a great system, because on other systems, it can sound a little muffled, a little dark. This record is almost mixed and mastered just to exploit the idea of having really punchy, transient heavy sub information that sounded good. And not every system is capable of reproducing that. If you're on a great system, this whole record, Random Access Memories, will sound great. If you're on a compromised system, it doesn't always sound great. It can sound just a little bit murky and subby and kind of veiled and dark on top. So if that's your experience of this record, it says something about the system that you're on. So I can learn a lot about any system just by hearing any of the songs on this record. Probably the least like that on this record is Instant Crush. This is probably, I think, the best song on the record, but it's one that's a little bit more tightly controlled. It doesn't have the same kind of really like fluid, syrupy, like big fat with a little nugget of transient on top of it on the low end, but a great sounding track too. See, it's full, it's beefy, it's deep, but just a little tighter as well. And so much more of a processed vocal on this one than the Pharrell stuff. Also more dynamically controlled as well as more affected. Man, another track that's like this, that can give me the same feel, but not as exaggerated of a way, that doesn't have quite the low end extension, is Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. This is a track that I will pull up on a system, particularly in a live environment. Because if I really want to get to know a system in a live sound environment or, a concert environment, I don't think Random Access Memories is always going to be the one that's going to do it for me. Some of that stuff might get swallowed up. I really want to hear this track and how this knocks on those kinds of like party environment settings. Here's a little bit of Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. This one's mastered, I think, relatively quiet. It's probably around -11. Like for a pop record, that is relatively quiet. Anything below -10. So it has some of the air and the punchiness and the transients in it that Random Access Memories has, but with a little bit more control and a little bit tighter and a little bit more modern sounding. Here we go with that.
This shit that ice cold, Michelle fight for that white gold. This one for them hood girls, them good girls, straight masterpieces. Styling, wildin', living it up in the city. Got Chuck's on with Saint Laurent, gotta kiss myself, I'm so pretty. I'm too hot. Call the police and the fireman, I'm too hot. Make a dragon wanna retire, man, I'm too hot. Say my name, you know who I am, I'm too hot. And my band about that money, break it down.
Now, that's a great sounding track. We're about to get into a totally different sounding section within it. We should listen to the drums in this section.
Hallelujah. Girl said you hallelujah. Girl said you hallelujah. Cause Uptown Funk don't give it to
It's so hard to stop there. There's such a payoff coming up in a second. All right. Well, I think you get what I'm talking about there, where it has some of that low-end extension and some of that low-end transient, some of that air around an element like kick drum that can tell you a lot about low frequencies without being so exaggeratedly subby as Random Access Memories is. So I listened to my 3 tracks first. I really listened to Paper Tiger, hear the first few seconds on this. It tells me a lot of low-end. Listen to the first few seconds of Elephant Woman. There's that transient sub and air and a little bit of Femme D Argent. Let's get to where the bass starts. And literally just by hearing 30 to 90 seconds of those 3 songs, I feel like I know a system inside and out. When I have more time, I'd love to listen to something off Random Access Memories and or maybe something like Uptown Funk. And then I feel like I really know a system. But then the other things to look at are teaching references and genre references. Those are really my primary tuning references. But I have some learning references, teaching references that turn into secondary or additional occasional tuning references for me, like tracks that taught me a lot about what compression and limiting sound like. So just to play for you really quick, in one of the most popular videos I did a long time ago on how to hear compression, 2 of the tracks that I nominate for listening to is She Said by the Beatles and Race for the Prize by the Flaming Lips. Let's hear both of those and listen to the, oh, no, I can't play She Said by the Beatles because then YouTube will can this. You're not allowed to play even a second of any Beatles stuff. So forget I even said anything about the Beatles. We'll take the whole video down. So we're not playing She Said, but go listen to that sometime and listen to how the cymbals almost sound like a reverse cymbal, like the attack is carved off and then we have this blossoming release off of it. Now, another one that really taught me, whoops here, I think I'm maybe running out of memory on my main computer. It's saying it's not saving a local recording. Interesting. Another thing that it taught me is Race for the Prize really taught me a lot about compression. Sorry about the interruption there as my computer gives me error messages. Let's listen to a little bit of this. Race for the Prize. We'll listen to the original master of it. Here we go. I mean, that's like the trashiest sounding drum kit in the universe, but it was a revelation for me when I first heard that record. Like, oh, you're allowed to do that, and that's awesome. Here's the 2017 remaster of it. Let's hear how much different it sounds. They really smooth it out a little bit. The accent is in a slightly different place, slightly less trashy and aggressive sounding. But that's a great record for learning what compression really sounds like on drums. But there's also tastefully used compression. One of my favorite records for listening to that kind of stuff is Johnny Cash's American recordings. But I also love these records by, I don't know how to pronounce her name. She's a French woman, Madeleine Perrault, I believe. She has a cover that's gorgeous here of Elliott Smith's Between the Bars. If you want to cry, we can listen to some of this song. But here is extreme compression for this style. These are like pop, jazz, chanson recordings. And man, once we start hearing this, I think you'll agree that for a jazz record, this is surprisingly sub-heavy and surprisingly compressed and limited. Let's have a listen to that. Dance Me to the End of Love by Madeleine Perrault.
Dance me to your beauty with that burning violin. Dance me through the panic till I'm gathered safely in. Lift me like an olive branch and be my homeward dove. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Let me see your beauty when the witnesses are gone.
Man, you can listen to some of that on your own, but a great sounding track. And you can really hear how everything is made so much larger than life for this style of music, how much low-end they're willing to put into the record in this style, how everything is like a outsized, almost cartoonish impression of itself, how the piano is handled, so mid-rangey and smooth and dynamically controlled. cool sounding production. So again, sometimes when I want to hear like, what does compression like? Can I hear release times on this system? That's one of the things that when I test nice high-end systems, sometimes I like to listen to over-compressed material on it because it really gives me a sense for like to what level of detail am I able to hear the attack, release, decay, sustain envelope of things. And sometimes hyper-compressed, hyper-limited materials brings that to the fore. I've got to play it for you. Just a few seconds of Between the Bars, her cover of an Elliott Smith song. Just gorgeous, heartbreaking.
Drink up, baby, stay up all night. Things you could do, you won't, but you might. The potential you'll be, you'll never see. Promises you'll only make. Drink up with me now and forget all about pressure of days. Do what I say and I'll make you okay. Drive them away. Images stuck in your head. People you've been before that you don't want around anymore. That push, shove won't bend to your will. I'll keep them still. Drink up.
Whew. I mean, that is just a devastating song. I'm getting teary-eyed listening to it. Same happens with the Elliott Smith version. I mean, that one, that song will hit me hard. I just can't stop it before we get to the end of that chorus. Now, that one, the Johnny Cash American recordings, like if you ever heard Johnny Cash Hurt, I don't want to go ahead and play too much of this stuff, but that does something for me similar to what the Madeleine Perot records do for me. If I want to hear the same kind of thing with a male vocal, the way that those were produced was a revelation for me when they came out, again, with how much limiting you can get away with and have it enhance the record and how much detail you can hear into the record with that amount of limiting. Sometimes those kinds of albums wear on you a little bit more quickly, but there's something about that style. Another record kind of in that style, I think, was the William Shatner record. If you ever heard that one, the one he did with Ben Folds, it kind of reminds me of that. There's some of these really, the vocal is so big and compressed, it's almost quivering. And that's something, that kind of record, I like to pull up one of those when I can on a system to really understand it well, if I'm really just tuning myself. So those are some reference ideas. A few more things are going to be genre references. So I pulled up Soundgarden here. If someone brings me a rock record and they're like, I don't know what my references are, like I'll try to get a sense for what style is it in? Is it in the grunge style? Like, or is it in the AC/DC style? You pull up different records, or is it like speed metal? Obviously, there's different records that you're going to love in each of these subgenres if you're doing heavy rock music. And Soundgarden is a nice kind of intermediate one for me. Super Unknown. It's one of those records that sounds beautiful on a big system and works well enough on small systems. I think a record like Nirvana's Nevermind translates really, really well to small systems, but doesn't necessarily sound as big and as impressive on big and impressive systems. So that's another type of reference. But another thing you have to keep in mind with your references is what can you bear listening to again and again? So these first three tracks, Paper Tiger, Elephant Woman, and La Femme D Argent, I could listen to them again and again. They're interesting enough in a hypnotic kind of way that I can hear them again and again. I don't get bored. I don't get tired because there's always something new. In a way, I could listen to a song like Between the Bars again and again because it's such a beautiful composition, but I would not use Between the Bars as a reference. And I would not use Nirvana as a reference. And the reason for that is I cannot handle listening to them again and again. I almost like literally cried on the live stream right here at a minute and 30 seconds into between the bars. Like that's not an experience I can have every time that I'm testing a system. It's just too much. Like I can't listen to Nirvana anymore. I'm scared to listen to Nirvana. I listened to so much Nirvana when I was a teenager that like I can't do it right now. Sonic Youth is actually kind of like that for me as well. Some of these records that you have such an emotional connection with or an emotional response to that it's like, man, I cannot use that as a reference. There's the one hand that you might cheapen the impact it has on you. And that's one scary possibility, that there's music out there that has the potential to have such a powerful impact on you, and it no longer has a powerful emotional impact because you're taking something powerful and meaningful and listening to it again and again and cheapening it every time. And that's one possible scary thought. The other possible scary thought is you'll turn into a puddle every single time you hear it, which might be the case for me. Man, listening to Between the Bars, if I had to listen to that as my reference every day, I might kill myself. Excuse me. I can't go. We don't talk about those things on YouTube. That's another thing that would stop things from. But you know, I don't know how I could live through the rest of my days listening to that song every day. It's like being in purgatory. That song, my goodness. So those are some other things I want you to think about. We've gone through. I've spent the most time on these tuning references. I have three main ones: Paper Tiger, Elephant Woman, Femme D Argent. Feel free to borrow them if you find them useful to listen to on a variety of systems. They've been extremely useful to me. Secondarily, to hear Transient Response, Random Access Memories, and Uptown Funk have been doing it for me. Genre references, you know, I have a bunch of them here. So there's so many different ways for a record to sound. This is one last thing I want to give you a sense for. Is when you're picking genre references and production references, sometimes even on the same record, stuff can sound dramatically different. So Paranoid Android by Radiohead is a surprisingly bright sounding mix, and Karma Police by Radiohead is not. And which of these I listen to as a reference can influence the direction I go in mastering. So I need to be aware of these kinds of things. Let's listen to a little bit of Paranoid Android. I mean, listen to how thin and bright that is. And compare that to the beginning of Paper Tiger real quick.
Just like a paper tiger, torn apart by idle hand.
Or compare that to Lose Yourself to Dance. If you're on a system that puts out bottom and you hear that compared to this, and even when more of our low-end instruments drop, it's still just a thin, tight-sounding mix. So we start to get some more low-end in the record, but it's missing like a whole bottom register compared to some of these other records we were talking about. That's not necessarily a problem. That's an aesthetic you can go for. And there's sometimes I'm working on like 90s sounding records where I want to go for this reduced type of low frequency. But listen to another record on the same album, same mastering engineer, Karma Police. This is so much thicker than Paranoid Android is. And you just hear how much more bottom end this has in it compared to same record, Paranoid Android. Here's Paranoid Android now, and here's a thick section. I mean, even in the dense sections where we have more low frequency instruments coming than that, it just doesn't hold a candle to the kind of bottom end that's loaded in on Karma Police, which is another one of those songs that was a bit of a revelation to me when it came out. Using low end and drum sounds the way that they are in Karma Police wasn't that common yet. And I think extremely influential in production. So yeah, those are some of my records and some of the general ideas I want to give you. If you were to listen to Paranoid Android right before completing a mix or a master, or listen to Karma Police right before completing a mix or a master, you might end up going in a totally different direction. You've normalized to your ear a different amount of low end as being appropriate. So those are the kinds of things I want you to think about. Chef Gulu asked, when will you start mastering? We are looking at references today, Chef. Go back to the beginning of the live stream and check it out. Speaking of the beginning of the live stream, we are now reaching towards the end of the live stream. I want you guys to write into the comments and the chat box and let me know which of these records resonated with you. Do you think any of these could be things that you use as your own reference? Do you have records that you could see being in each of these categories for you? The category of references that are teaching references, of references that are genre references, and references that are tuning references. I want to hear from you in the comments down below. I'll read through the live chat just as soon as this ends as well. Also, big shout out and thanks to our branded sponsor, Sound Toys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe, Focusrite, and Adam, who just come out with the new Arctic White speakers. If you want to support this podcast, the best way to do it is by sponsoring yourself. Check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, or Compression Breakthroughs. Each one of them is guaranteed to change the way that you work forever, for the better, or your money back. Big thanks again for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time. That is, if it lets me end my live stream, because now apparently my computer's freezing. I'm gonna have to play you out with some music as I try to end my live stream. Who do you guys want to hear on the way out? If it even lets me open Spotify. All right, let's see if I can shut this down. Will it let me? Most awkward ending to a live stream ever. Do you guys know any good jokes? Type them into the chat. All right, here we go. I've got it. I've got my button back. I'm getting a new computer for the month of May. It should be here soon, so we'll have even more horsepower for these things in the future. See you guys.